In lesson 7, we're going to revisit graphing lines. This should be relatively familiar to us, but I think it warrants the extra practice. So there's two ways that we can go about graphing lines. We can either be given the intercepts and plot each of those intercepts and then graph the line that goes through those 2 points. Or for that matter, we could even solve for the 2 intercepts and then plot the points and then graph the line. The other way of graphing a line is to start with some given point on the line, and by using the slope kind of as a navigation system or like a GPS set of coordinates, we can count rise and run by either counting up or down, followed by counting right or left, and start to pick up other points on the line as well. So we're going to get started by keeping things simple. I'm actually just going to go through one of these examples for you in these first 3 by plotting the intercepts. And then we'll get into a little more detail in the bottom group of problems. So let's start. We know that an x-intercept, or if we need a reminder, that's a point on the x-axis. So if the x-intercept is 3, we're going to find that point on the x-axis, and because it's positive 3, it will be 1, 2, 3 spaces to the right of the origin on the x-axis. And then our y-intercept, being that it's a value of -2, will be on the y-axis. Because it's negative, it'll be 2 spaces below the origin. So I can plot that point as well. So my x-intercept, as a reminder, is on the x-axis, either to the right because it's positive or to the left because it's negative. And my y-intercept is on the y-axis, either above the origin because it's positive or below the origin because it's negative. Now, this is the case of the disappearing point, as you see. I'm going to keep trying to fight with this and make sure I get that point to stick. Okay, there we go. So now I'm going to graph my line. You'll be using a ruler to do this, and I'm just going to run that line straight through the points. Remember, I don't want any stubby lines, so your lines will extend off the coordinate plane, and likewise, they will have arrow tips to show that you're graphing a line, not a line segment. Okay, that's just the mathematically correct way of doing it. So I'm going to leave it up to you to finish graphing these other 2 lines. This line with an x-intercept of -6 and a y-intercept of -4, and the final line an x-intercept of 2 and a y-intercept of 4. So you're going to follow up with graphing this second line on the second coordinate plane and this third line on the third coordinate plane. So I think you should be comfortable enough doing that. So where things might get a little less familiar, and maybe this is where the practice is going to be helpful, is in graphing a line where we're given a point. Here's my point. Remember, that point is made up of an x coordinate and a y coordinate, and by being given our slope. Now remember, our slope is our rise over our run. Whoops, is our rise over our run. So I can start by plotting the known point. In this case, my known point is -1, 2. So I start at the origin. -1 means to go along the x-axis 1 to the left. And +2 means to then follow by going up 2 and plotting that point. So that is the point that we're going to plot right there, -1, 2. Now remember, the slope is a rise and a run. It's basically giving us some GPS coordinates for finding another point or more on the line. So the fact that my rise is 2 means that I can count up 2 spaces. And because my run is +3, I can follow that by counting 3 spaces to the right. So starting at my point that I've already plotted, I can count 1, 2 spaces up from my rise of 2 in my slope, and then turn, because it's +3 for run, I can go 1, 2, 3, and I can plot a new point. Now, the luxury I have is because I have the space to do it, I can continue counting rise and run with each new point that I've created. So from this point, as long as I have the space to do it, I can count a rise of 2 again. My rise and my slope is 2. I can go up 1, 2. I have the space to do it. And I can run 1, 2, 3 to the right, and I can pick up yet another point on that line. Now, what I'm also able to do is to think about that slope in reverse. And this is really where I want you guys to get used to traveling on both ends of the line. So if I go back to my starting point, that -1, 2, where I've exhausted all opportunity and space to count up and to the right, I can continue on that line by moving in the opposite direction. So instead of going up, I'm going to go down 2. And to stay on the line, I'm not going to be able to turn to the right and count 3. I'll have to do the counter move to that and count 1, 2, 3 to the left. And I can plot yet another point in the other direction of the line. Okay? So I can do that. Now, if I had space to do it, I would do that again. I could count down 2, and I would have to follow that by counting to the left 3, but I don't have the space. So I have all the points that I can plot by first plotting my starting point and then using my rise and run, to graph other or to plot other lines. And now, again, with the use of a ruler, I can graph a nice straight line and represent the line that has the slope of 2/3. Whoops, that has a slope of 2/3 while passing to the point -1, 2. So I'm going to have you do the same thing for these other two. Now, I'll spend a little bit of time getting things set up here because in both cases our slope is negative. I don't think you finding the starting point is going to be the issue, but you might get a little confused about the slope. So when we see a slope of -1/4, it means I either have a slope that's -1 over +4. Now think about what that means. The -1 means I can count down, and the +4 for the run means I can count to the right. Now, the other alternative is that I can count instead of down 1. The other way I can do it is if I think of it not being -1 over +4, but instead I think of it as +1 over -4. Now, the +1 is going to tell me I'm going to count up now, but the negative is going to tell me I'm going to count left. So don't be hesitant when you're mapping out what these points are going to look like. Don't be hesitant to write out the slope like this with these directional arrows. So once I establish my starting point, I'll know that in one case I can go down and to the right, -1 over +4, or in the other case I can go up and to the left, +1 over -4. Those are both slopes that are equivalent to -1/4. Likewise, with this slope here, being that it's negative, I can think of it as -2 over +1, or I can think of it as the opposites of those, 2 over -1. And let the signs dictate your direction. So if I'm going to be counting a rise that's negative, I'm going to be counting a rise that's in the downward direction, matched with a run that's positive that's moving to the right. Whereas if I choose to go in the other direction of the line, if I'm going to have a rise that's positive, I'm going to be counting up, but matching with that, a run that's negative, which means I'll be counting to the left. So these combinations will give you the proper way of traveling along the line after you plot that starting point of 3, 4. So what you have left to finish up is just the front side of these notes. You have these intercepts to plot in graphing the respective lines for the second and the third graphs up above. And you have these two additional lines to graph by way of using the starting point given and the slope to count other points, and then graphing the respective lines. And when we come back to class, you'll check those in class, and then we'll continue with some more practice. So you do not have to do anything further on the back of this page. This will be left for class time when we come in tomorrow. We'll see you then.